Alright guys, so one other thing I want to do before we move on to the next file is this. I actually forgot to public products. I just want to make an empty constructor, so then we aren't constrained to having to make a product name or pass in a product name every time we want to create a product object. If we ever decide we just want to create an object and then set the name later on, we can do that with initializing it with an empty constructor. So after this, what I want to do is I want to actually add a new class, and I'm going to call this class myDB handler. Now, people typically call these DB managers or DB handlers, and what they are is it's going to be a class specifically for working with that database, with that file that we can save on the user's device. So let me delete this first and paste in all my imports, and while you copy these down, I'll explain this. So this class is going to be responsible for everything that you do with the database. Whenever you create a new database, whenever you upgrade a database, whenever you add products or items to that database, anything that pretty much, if you're trying to do something in the sentence involves the word database, this is what this class is going to be responsible for. Now, another thing that I would highly recommend is after you type all the code from this tutorial, keep it and set it aside, because whenever you want to work with this again, pretty much whenever you want an app that can save stuff, you can just paste this in, change a few variables, and it's going to work fine. So the first thing we need to do in order to use the SQL database, we need to extend SQLite open helper right here. So it's giving us some errors because it says, okay, there are a couple things that you need to do whenever you inherit from this class. Now we'll get to those in just a sec, but for right now, let me just go ahead and make a few variables. So we need to set up a few variables for A, what do you want to name the database, what do you want your table to be named, in variables that store each column name. So let's do that right now. So private static final int, the first one is database version. Now for right now, just set this equal to 1 because this is the very first time we're creating this database and I spelled version wrong. So this is our first database version. It's going to consist of one table, and that table is going to be able to store however many items you want, and those items are going to have an ID and a product name. Cool, pretty cool app. Oh, wait a minute. All my users are complaining because they want to be able to store the color of their products as too. Well, now I need a new database structure, so whenever you update your database, you're going to have to upgrade the version as well, and that just makes the rest of your app compatible with the information that you're trying to store. Simple enough. Oh, so now, let me copy these. Private static final string, and make a constant called database name. Now, of course, essentially what we're doing is we are saving the user's information to a file, so that way they can turn off their phone, go use other apps, and come back to here and it's saved. So inside the database name is just, what do you want to name the file? Well, I'm just going to name it product.db, whatever, or products, might as well, since they're probably going to store a couple in here. Name it whatever you want, but make sure you have that DB extension. That tells Android that there is a database file stored in here. So after this is pretty much just MySQL stuff. Public static final string table products, and what this is just the name of your table. So remember how MySQL works is you have a database and you can store a bunch of different tables inside that one database. Now for this example, we're just going to have one table in it, but of course that table still needs a name, and I'm going to name mine products. Now the only other two variables or constants that you need are this: the names of your columns. So again, they're strings, and I'm going to name it column underscore ID. And this is, of course, the ID And if you just copy this, and however many columns you have in your table, then just add a new constant for each, but I'm only going to have 2. Product name, and of course this is just product name. So again, if we ever decide to update our structure of the database, then we're going to need to change the version. This is just the file that you're saving on the device, the file's name. This is the name of your table, and for every single column in your table, just go ahead and make it a constant, so then if we ever have to change it, we don't have to change it a million times, only right here. So now let's go ahead and get rid of these errors. So these errors are saying, in order to use SQL storage on your phone, you need to do 3 things. You first need the constructor. Second, and we have to do some stuff to here, but I'm just going to show you guys what you need. Second, you need to override 2 methods. So let's go ahead and override methods, and that is onCreate and onUpgrade. Now, as soon as you add those, then the errors go away, but of course we need to understand what these mean. So the constructor is essentially just for housekeeping stuff. We need to pass some information along to the superclass, pretty much the class that works directly with Android and takes care of all the behind the scenes stuff for the SQL. So the first thing we need is context, which is just background information, which is fine. The next one is the name of your database. Oh, look at that, already took care of it right there. So pass along the name so it knows which file to save it under, and the factory, background information. Now the version is what database version are you working with. Boom, roasted. Now, what are these methods right here? Well, the reason that we needed these methods are because it's saying, okay, whenever you create this table for the first time, what do you want me to do? Well, right now it's doing nothing, but of course it needs to know what you want to do, so that's why it made you implement this method. And this onUpgrade, if you ever are upgrading your version, then it's going to call this right here. So again, the very first time that we run this, it's going to call this onCreate method, so it would probably be a good idea in here to create that table so we can store stuff in it. So in order to do this, if you ever work with PHP or anything, it's probably going to be pretty easy. But we first need to make a new query. And you can name your variable anything you want. I just like naming it query. And the query of this is going to be create table, just like normal SQL. And of course, we need to pass table products. In other words, your table name. So create table called products. Now after here, it's saying, okay, well, what columns do you want? So add that little parenthesis, and now you give the names of all your columns. So the first one is ID. My nose is kind of like stuffy or something right now. Alright, let me just set up the structure for this first. Alright, so for each row, actually let me just finish typing everything, and then it'll probably make a lot more sense. Alright, so again, this is probably the best way to set up your query. Create a table, and then after it you write the name of your table, which will be products, and then inside these little parentheses right here, you pretty much write the information about each column you want created with your table. So for the ID, what properties do we want for the ID? Well, this is pretty easy. Obviously, we want it to be an integer, a number. We also want it to be the primary key so that it can't be duplicated. So this is pretty much the unique identifier for this. And the last one is auto increment. So that way we don't need to pass it a number manually every time. It automatically increases by 1, saves us a bunch of code. Now for the product name, this is a little bit easier. The only thing we're going to write in here is text. since we're going to be storing a word like ham, tuna, Powerade, Kleenex, whatever. I'm really just looking at everything around my computer. I see a Powerade, a Kleenex. It's for blowing my nose, people, not what you probably would think. And of course I have a huge Christmas ham and a tuna that I rest my feet on instead of a footstool. Anyways, moving on. Not important, and it's definitely not weird at all. Let's go ahead and take db.exec_SQL and pass our query in here. So this is essentially how we execute queries on Android, simple stuff. Now db got passed in by the SQL database, so we don't have to worry about that. And exec_SQL, whoa, it's kind of weird to say. It means execute the SQL query. What query do you want to execute? Well, how about this one that we just created? So again, whenever it creates this database for the very first time, it's going to create this table right here, and once it's created, we can start storing some products in it.